Hi guys, DevilHunterXYZ, and today I decided to do another movie review, and of course this time around I'm going with Karate Kid Legends, which I guess in hindsight is kind of like a sequel slash continuation of the TV show, the TV series Cobra Kai. Uh, well, somewhat loosely based off of that, and kind of somewhat loosely based off of the 2010 Karate Kid remake. But yeah, I guess in itself, it does share similarities, and it is still part of the Karate Kid franchise. So let's take a look at it. Well, for the summary of this movie, it starts out kind of some of a playback of Karate Kid 2, where Daniel is visiting Okinawa with Mr. Miyagi, and of course, Mr. Miyagi tells the story, the origins of Miyagi Do Karate, which he later kind of explains that one of his ancestors, while fishing, ends up in Beijing, taken by the Han family, and of course, the Han family taught him kung fu, which later on Miyagi's ancestor would kind of perfected that into Miyagi Do Karate. Transitioning into the present day, we have a kung fu master, Mr. Han, I guess. He's teaching his students, and of course he's trying to also teach his nephew Lee, but unfortunately Lee's mother is against him even learning kung fu after her losing her other son, unfortunately. And of course, she ends up informing them that, well, she ends up informing both Lee and Mr. Han that she accepted a job in New York, and she was going to move over to New York with Lee to start a new life. Well, after moving to New York, Lee tries to adjust, of course, fails awkwardly, but he does ends up meeting the owner of a pizza restaurant, a pizzeria. His name was Victor Lipani, and his daughter Mia Lipani. Eventually, of course, they kind of end up with this little somewhat romance that's going on here. But unfortunately, Mia's ex-boyfriend, known as Connor Day, who's kind of like a prodigy at mixed martial arts within this place called Demolition, which I guess is kind of like this version's Cobra Kai. He tries to constantly win her over again, and eventually it kind of leads to a scuffle between Connor and Lee, which unfortunately Lee ends up losing most times. And of course, as the movie goes on, Lee ends up telling his story to Victor that when he was younger, his older brother Bo was murdered after winning a kung fu tournament, and of course he froze. After the tournament, he froze after people, some of the thugs jumped both of them, and he couldn't save his brother. It paralyzed him. So he's been paralyzed with fear, and he's been living that regret for a long time. So that's why he's kind of hesitant on really with training anyone with kung fu anymore, and that's kind of the reason why his mother's always been against it. But of course, as time goes on in that movie, we find out that the Lapanis have been owning. They technically owe money to some loan sharks after Victor have taken in a few loans that he couldn't pay off, and so he asks Lee to help train him for like a boxing match so that he could potentially win money to help pay off the debts. And of course, it goes into a little training montage thing. And as the big match actually does happen, unfortunately, he ends up getting knocked out. Technically, he won, but due to the other boxer, playing dirty, he ends up getting Victor ends up getting knocked out. And of course, Mia kind of blames Lee for it, and at the same time, it kind of puts a strain on their relationship. Well, eventually, Mr. Han makes an appearance in New York. He ends up visiting Lee and his mother, and of course, he tries to convince Lee to enter in a martial arts tournament known as the Five Boroughs tournaments. one of the, I guess, one of the most popular tournaments in the city, and as a way to help the Lapanis pay off their debts, and at the same time a way for Lee to confront his internal struggles from within, from losing his brother. And of course he ends up Mr. Han ends up going out to Los Angeles in order to find Daniel LaRusso, as Mr. Miyagi had always told Mr. Han of Daniel and his success, and how they were always great friends. So he goes over there to try to convince Daniel to help train Lee for the tournament. Well, eventually, Lee's tutor, Alan, ends up allowing him to train in a rooftop garden, kind of like a makeshift dojo, so to speak. And there, Mr. Han and Daniel ended up training Lee in like a mixed combination of Miyagi-Do karate and kung fu. Over the course of the training, though, Mr. Han convinces Lee's mother that martial arts has always been a good thing for him, and a way for him to kind of confront his past. And at the same time, Lee was end up making amends to Mia and her father, for everything that he put him through, and gathering all their support. He ends up entering the tournament. He makes it to the finals along with his big rival Connor Day, and it kind of leads into this one big final fight. And it was kind of a push and pull kind of thing, and eventually Lee ends up winning the tournament with a signature, well, kind of a variation of a dragon kick technique, and ends up winning the match and ends up earning Connor's respect. And it just kind of ends like that for the most part. Yeah, so Lee becomes the new champion of the 5 boroughs. But of course, in the post credits afterwards, after the tournament, after winning the money from the 5 boroughs, the Lapanis were able to open up a second pizza shop, and as an appreciation, Lee sends out a pizza with a message all the way out to Los Angeles to Daniels. And of course we get a small cameo appearance from Johnny Lawrence himself, kind of coming up a new business idea of starting a new pizzeria. Well, for the good, I would say, well, for one, it doesn't really seem to follow much of the previous movies. It kind of feels like it's its own thing. So I guess if you really haven't seen any of the previous Karate Kid movies, I mean, luckily, this is kind of more like its own self-contained story for the most part. And luckily, it doesn't really seem to follow off of the TV show Cobra Kai. So if you haven't finished watching that, it doesn't really seem to get too involved in that. And of course, the second I would probably say is I do like the combination of both the Miyagi-Do karate and kung fu, kind of taking both elements of like the original Karate Kid and then the 2010 remake and putting them together. And of course, there have kind of been instances of elements of both. Some of the old stuff from the original Karate Kid, and then the 2010s, with the Mr. Han, and then of course the jacket on, jacket off routine. So it does kind of play a little bit to that. And the third, I kind of like the fact that Lee here is supposed to be like how Daniel was back when trying to fit in to the norm, trying to fit into the norm, trying to abide by a new society, new standards, whatnot, and he ends up earning the respect of his bullies, kind of similar to that regards. Well, for the bad, I would probably say, for one thing, as much as I praise the combination of both the Miyagi-Do karate and the kung fu, uh, I kind of wish there was more of like a stronger connection, to be honest. And after hearing that there was supposed to be a subtle connection to it, I kind of thought maybe, like for instance, the Mr. Han here. I thought this was initially supposed to be the same Mr. Han that was in the 2010 remake. And honestly, I was expecting them to maybe drop in some references to Dre Parker to kind of further tie in that connection. But unfortunately, there's no real there's no real connection between that. Unfortunately, like real world wise. And second, as much as I like Lee and his fighting through his struggles, kind of in the end of the day, it just feels like a rehash of the first movie, so to speak. I mean, if you compare it to the very first Karate Kid movie, it's very similar in that regards. Kind of seems almost like a little bit an unoriginal plot at that point, or more like an excuse to try to throw in Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio together, which kind of leads into the third thing. It's just the fact that we don't really get those characters, Mr. Han and Daniel, until like the last third of the movie, which it does. I kind of was thinking this movie was kind of more focused with all three characters like that, but not too much really. For a long time, it just kind of more focuses on Lee trying to fit in and try to help out with the Latapani family for the most part, and especially it kind of feels rushed during the tournament. It just kind of happens. It just kind of happens. I mean, I think really the whole tournament thing was barely like 10 minutes out of the entire movie time. Compare that to the original Karate Kid, where I mean they kind of took time. They kind of took a little bit more time to flesh out that tournament even more. So here it just kind of felt more rushed just to get to that final match against Lee and Connor. Well, overall, I would say Karate Kid Legends is okay. Uh, I mean, as much as I really wanted to like this movie, for the most part, it just feels like a giant rehash of the first movie. But at the same time, it kind of did feel a little bit refreshed to some regards. I guess maybe more. I guess maybe this movie was kind of more delegated towards the newer generation, for those who never really grew up with the original Karate Kid. I mean, maybe that could have been the whole purpose behind this movie. But I guess some could also say that it was just more of a cash grab just to get some, popular actors back on film once again. But I digress on that. But for the most part, though, it was entertaining nonetheless. I would say that it did have a lot of action into it, and it did kind of show a lot. It kind of did show a lot between the how New York is compared to like how it was in Los Angeles, like back in the original Karate Kid movies. So it was kind of a change in scenery that I did enjoy. But for the most part, though, I would honestly say that it's not really worth watching, to be honest. I mean, you're not really missing anything by skipping this movie. It's like I said, it was a self-contained movie, its own plot. It didn't piggyback off of any other movies or whatnot. So it's kind of in its own thing. But for the most part, it is what it is. It's just trying to be like the first Karate Kid in modern times right now. but with that, I would probably give this movie a final score of a 5 out of 10. Just plain average. I mean, take it what you will. If you really want to see the movie, if you're a fan of the Karate Kid series, and then go for it. But honestly, you're not really missing much just skipping this one. All right, guys, this is DevilHunterXYZ, and until next time.